For this video, we're going to talk about what's known as the angles of the chart, which include the Ascendant and the Midheaven are the most commonly referred to ones, and the points opposite the Ascendant would be known as the Descendant, or where the sun descends, which would be the Western horizon. And then the point opposite the Midheaven is known as the Nadir, or the IC, which stands for Immune Coeli. MC stands for Medium Coeli, which is a Latin word. I don't even know what that means. Something that's relevant to this discussion is there are many systems for setting the houses. So in the whole sign house system, in this case, we're looking at Sarah's chart. Her ascendant is in the middle of Capricorn, so the entire sign of Capricorn would be considered her first house. In the Placidius system, which I'm using, which is more commonly used, the first house would be indicated by this, the pie, or the slice of pie here, and there's the number for the houses are indicated right here in the middle of the chart. So you see 1, this is the first house, there's 2, second house, 3, fourth house, and so on.
Can I just interrupt you? Sorry, I just had
Sure.
a general astrology question that's always confused me. Why are the actual, the sometimes when you look at a natal chart, the houses are divided up, equally. Each piece of the pie is exactly the same size, and in other charts, like the first house is much larger than
Yeah.
say the 12th
So
house.
in that case, there's another house system called equal house, which basically just takes the ascendant as the beginning of the first house and then makes each subsequent house exactly 30 degrees. So I think that one's less commonly used, though I don't know what every other astrologer is doing it. Like I haven't taken a poll. I'm not aware of anybody who has. So that's another house system. And as you're learning astrology, we're not going to go too much in it in this video right now. For this video, we're just kind of explaining what the angles of the chart are, and included in that will be a discussion of the houses, because the angles are part of the house system. So in that system, then the Midheaven and the IC could fall in either the third or the fourth house, or in extreme cases, could be the Midheaven could be in the 8th or 11th house. So yeah, that's a whole other discussion, which house system is more valid, and I have a lot of more, you could say, like metaphysical kind of theoretical theories about why that is. But every astrologer has whatever house system that they've picked and gone with. And it seems that Astro.com, this is what Liz Green and Robert Hand have found to be, what they use. And they're very experienced astrologers. They were, famous and have done many thousands of readings each. And for whatever reason, they found this to be useful. I personally have found it to hold up, to be accurate. And the way I've gone about finding that out is when the energy shifts of if a transiting planet has changed house, as well as progressions from one house to another. Does it hold up for the theme of that house? It's the 7th house is really probably the easiest to find that. Like, are you finding either issues in your relationships or people represented by the qualities of a particular planet, especially if there's an outer planet moving slowly through your 7th house? You're going to find, in my case, Pluto's been in my 7th house for, I think, 6 or 7 years, and I'm definitely experiencing themes of Pluto in my relationship and people who have those kind of Pluto-like qualities, and they're showing their Pluto-like qualities in my life. And so I've gotten a lot of lessons of the lessons of Pluto in my close relationships. And then when a transit or progression moves into the 8th house, you can expect some more emotionally intense experiences. So my progressed sun moved in my 8th house a few years ago. And a lot of growth has come from that, and that's certainly an 8th house theme is how can you grow from those intense emotional experiences. So that's where I get that from, where I have used my life experience as well as what I've seen in others to kind of validate the house system that I'm using. So in this video, we're talking about the angles, which is also going to include a discussion of the houses. The ascendant is the most important angle. It's always going to be at 9 o'clock. The next, if we just go around the wheel, counterclockwise, the direction of the planets, we get to the IC, which is going to be the beginning of the 4th house, at least in the Placidius system, which I suggest we use if you're following this training. You can explore other systems down the road if you get that far. But in the beginning, I suggest just using the default system to keep things simple. So the IC, also known as the Nadir, the point at the bottom of the chart, is going to be the beginning of the 4th house. Next, we get to the DC, also known as the Descendant, is going to be the beginning of the 7th house. It's always going to be at 3 o'clock, exactly opposite the Ascendant. In any system, the Ascendant and Descendant are always going to be at 9 and 3. And then Midheaven is going to be the beginning of the 10th house. 10th house is going to be at the top of the chart. It's usually not at exactly 12 o'clock. It's usually to the left or the right of that, though it can be. In some cases, it will be. So people are born around noon. Their sun is going to be near the midheaven. If you're born around midnight, your sun is going to be around the IC. If you're born around sunrise, your sun will be near the ascendant. If you're born around sunset, your sun will be around the descendant. So it's based on the rotation of the earth. So the ascendant will, as well as all 4 of the angles, will move through all 12 signs every 24 hours. So we already did a video on the ascendant, but I'll cover it briefly here just for the purpose of this video. You can think of the ascendant as, you can really think of all 4 of the angles. Is in the system that I'm using, at least in the way that I'm teaching it, is like, this is how we take the sun, the moon, and the planets, and we bring, the sun, the moon, and the planets is like our true nature. This is who we are. It's how we bring ourselves into the world. And so all 4 of these angles, but particularly the ascendant and the midheaven, are going to talk about how other people experience you and kind of perceive you in the world, and how you bring the energy of your true self out into the world. To where the IC and the DC, or the Nadir and the Descendant, are a little more below the surface, perhaps. This is going to be more part of your private life, and talking about how the other people have affected you and kind of affected how you bring yourself into the world. So the ascendant is, I found, who really pertain to people's first impression of you, how people perceive you. Included in that discussion, in the discussion of all 4 of the angles, is the planet which disposits or is ruled by, or rules the sign in which it's in. So in this case, Sarah's ascendant is in, this is Sarah's chart, by the way. Sarah's ascendant is in Capricorn. So then the ruler of her ascendant is going to be Saturn. But this is very relevant. This is something that's important to understand, is that the ruler of your ascendant is in, certainly used to be, probably still is in some cases, or according to some astrologers, is considered your chart's ruler. So it is elevated in significance to being equivalent to, or as important as, your sun and your moon. And so, interestingly, in Sarah's case, her chart ruler is conjunct her sun in the sun's sign of rulership. So that's significant for Sarah. In this case, her. So then you could look at your chart ruler as like kind of how you bring yourself out into the world and how other people perceive you. So in that case, it is conjunct or blended with her sun, which would kind of rule her public life. This is how Sarah brings her energy out into the world, how she shines her light. So those two energies are going to be blended. In most cases, they're not. They're in different places in the chart, and it's kind of part of somebody's life path. Is how do you integrate those energies? So next we get to the IC, also known as the Nadir. It's going to be the beginning of the fourth house. I've found that the IC, particularly if there's planets within 10 degrees of it, whether it's on the third house or the fourth house side, to correspond to a person's childhood and particularly those formative experiences in their childhood. Very often, more often than not, it's going to also somehow relate to their parents. Though if it's in the third house side, it may also relate to their siblings or their experience in school, and how that formed them, perhaps their teachers or their peers, or it could be anything. So if there is particularly an outer planet near the IC, particularly in the fourth house side, though it could be either, there may be some sort of trauma or challenging experience that's part of this person's childhood that for some reason has stood out and has been formative. And so then you could look at the IC being those experiences from your childhood that have shaped who you've become as an adult. Also, in a more practical way, it does also correspond to just the simple third house or fourth house themes. So third house, is where you're interacting with a lot of people, perhaps in the neighborhood. Next, we get to the DC or the Descendant. It's the western horizon where the sun descends as the beginning of the seventh house. So you could look at the sign as well as the planet which rules that to indicate your relationships. So, and I've found this to hold up, that in Sarah's case, she's perhaps going to experience, now she has planets in her seventh house, so that's also going to be more significant in indicating her relationships. But for those that don't have any planets in the seventh house, or within 10 degrees of the descendant in the sixth house, the sign as well as the planet which rules that sign are going to be like the primary indication of relationships in their life. So if Sarah didn't have anything in her seventh house or near her descendant in the sixth house, I would expect her to experience people with prominent Cancer, or in this case, Cancer is ruled by the moon. So everything that is indicated by the moon, sign, house, aspects, she has a heavily aspected moon. So, I'd expect her to, also considering that her sun and chart ruler are in the seventh house, relationships I would expect to be complex and important in Sarah's life. And I say complex because her moon is so heavily aspected. I mean, her moon's an aspect to almost, it seems like every planet in her chart, actually, which, it's interesting.
I mean, I definitely would say that's true. I mean, I just as somebody that's not a professional astrologer, Sun conjunct Saturn in the seventh house, you take relationships very seriously and you see that as like part of your life's work. And I do think I feel that way, like any relationships I have with people, whether it's like your romantic relationships with a spouse or, my son, my son has his moon in Cancer. So that's actually interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's a whole other discussion, which we will get to down the road, is analyzing relationships using astrology for that. So yeah, DC, simple relationships, and that's, another thing I've heard described, with this Jungian psychology, which is very much part of Liz Green's model. The DC shows us the parts of ourself which we haven't acknowledged and brought out into the world. And so then we find them in relationships as a way of kind of completing ourselves. So that's something that she said that may or may not be accurate. I would say to some extent it probably is, so this is like elements of ourself, which perhaps we need to develop consciousness around to discover and kind of bring out into the world and to refine it in some way. And then next we get to the MC, better known as the Midheaven, which is always going to be at the top of the chart. In Sarah's case, it's more like around 11 o'clock. In my chart, it's more around 1 o'clock. So it could be anywhere from, I would say probably 10:30 to 1:30. It primarily is indicating a career. So this is when people come with career issues. It's the beginning of the 10th house. 10th house, the primary topic is career. It's more than that. I've also heard the Midheaven describing how, like, the general public perceives you, which can include people that don't actually know you at all. So I think that would be more relevant to people who are in a position where they're seen by people who don't actually know them. Perhaps like in this case, people who are watching these videos who will never meet. Perhaps my Midheaven might describe certain qualities. So it would be the sign, as well as any planets that are near that, as well as the planet then which rules the Midheaven. In Sarah's case, she has her Midheaven in Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto. Pluto is in Libra in her 9th house. So you then have 9th house Sagittarius quality, Libra qualities. It's also conjunct her North Node, and it's pretty heavily aspected. It's opposite her moon, trine to Mars, sextile to Neptune, sextile to the Sun. So a lot going on with Pluto here as well. It would take more time than we have in this video to really break that whole thing down. But that would all then kind of be tied into the Midheaven, is the planet which rules the sign that the Midheaven is in, as well as any planets that are near it. So transits to the Ascendant very often will correspond to some sort of identity change, some sort of kind of stressful period of life, which then leaves you emerging as presenting yourself in the world as a new person. Transits to the IC very often will correspond to changes in the home. And it's not necessarily going to be something dramatic, but there just may be some tension kind of, or whatever it is that corresponds to the planet or that's transiting or progressing through that point. It could also bring up like material from your childhood to be processed. So it may correspond to some sort of transformation that may be less noticeable to the public. So perhaps you're going through an inner change, but those people who you interact with out in the public don't necessarily notice anything's different, but you feel different, perhaps. Transits to the Descendant usually correspond to something with relationships, and that does seem to be fairly straightforward, at least in what I've seen. It could and probably will also correspond to some sort of a change for the individual involved that will kind of change who they are, and through that process of change will also change the type of people they attract and seek in relationship. And if it's an outer planet that's transiting over the Descendant, that outer planet will then be in the 7th house for a period of time. If it's Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, it'll be for quite a while. So you can also then expect to attract people who fit the qualities of whatever that planet is, or perhaps the qualities of, like in my case, Pluto, will be prominent. It's like the person's kind of Plutonian qualities will somehow get activated through their relationship with me. And then transits to the Midheaven will usually affect career. Though it could also be somehow the person's emerging into the public in a new way. And so something else that's also important to consider, going back to the video on transits, but just reiterating that, is when you have an outer planet that's making a transit, like Uranus is always what Uranus is, but for that individual, it's going to also be what it is in your birth chart. So let me look at if there's anything. Okay, so for Sarah, you have Uranus is here at her Midheaven. So it's going to be connected to her career, but it's also heavily aspected, including being square to her sun. So Uranus just transited over Sarah's IC. It would have been a couple years ago that it completed that transit, I think 2020, 21. And so I would expect what Uranus is how it's represented in a birth chart to have had an effect on her home.
I was laid off from my job in August of 2021, but I think, or was it 2020?
And then you moved as well, right?
And I moved. Yeah. So there was a lot of change, and it wasn't, whenever there's change, I don't really necessarily look at it as bad, even like being laid off from a job or something. It's okay. It's a new opportunity to do something else. There was a lot of change during that time. I would definitely agree with that. And it was sparked by career. Yeah.
And that's interesting. It's kind of like a perfect fit, of this is an example of when astrology is like, kind of textbook description is, it's Uranus is connected to your career. So a change in career then affected change in home, and in this case, very literally a relocation.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because I remember when we did the planets video, you talked a lot about, you talked about the energies that the planets bring and how those outer planets are in, they can bring on emotions, but they're not necessarily emotional energies. And I think like when I lost my job during that transit, it didn't feel personal or emotional. Like it felt like, they let go of a quarter of the company. So it was just, okay, this was going to happen. Like it did just feel like a bolt of lightning that you couldn't control. Like there wasn't a feeling of like, what could I have done differently to change that outcome? It was like, it's Uranus, it's happening. It is what it is.
Yeah. And we could also look at transits to your ascendant. I mean, real quick, you had Pluto going over there. I think it would have been 2012-ish, or 2012 through 14, somewhere in there. And then Saturn went over there. Saturn and Jupiter went over there 2000. I think Saturn would have been 2019. Jupiter was probably 2020, I think. So
I moved in 2019. That was probably the Saturn transit. I moved states, and that was difficult. That was like an unexpected, difficult move. So it felt more.
And would you say you're? Did you have any health issues going on? And I would expect perhaps the Pluto transit, which we'd have to look up exact dates, but would have been like 2014-ish.
No, those were difficult years for me. I wouldn't say there was any.
Wasn't health, but would you say your identity kind of changed? You went through some sort of challenging time and
it felt very unsettled. Like that like sometimes you'll have these times in your life where you don't know what's going to happen next. And like for me, like I'm somebody that really, maybe because I have a Capricorn ascendant, I'm somebody that likes to plan things and have structure. And that time just felt for me, it was like, I was renting an apartment. I didn't know if I would be able to rent it. It was just like this very like uncertain. It wasn't a happy, pleasant time. It was happy in the sense that my son was young and, there was good things in that way happening, but it just felt like, I think I was kind of unhappy because I didn't know what was coming next. And for me, that makes me unhappy.
And that is fairly typical of what I've found when an outer planet transits a person's ascendant is more commonly. So the health issues are something that happen, but I would say it's less common. What's more common is it's just a challenging period of a person's life. And if they use that energy well, when they come out on the other side of it, they've somehow been transformed.